Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Scott Kane. I am the State E-Rate Coordinator for Kentucky Department of Education. Um, I am here with my colleague and partner in hijinks, Caprice Robinson. Caprice is going to be doing some monitoring of questions um, and assisting as we go forward today. I do want to encourage everyone to feel free at any point to drop a question in um, the chat window, and if you have any questions as we're going forward, you can use the chat, or feel free to just chime in. Unmute yourself and say, "Hey, Scott, I've got a question." I don't mind that at all, and in fact, a lot of the time, those kinds of questions are, you're asking it just in time, and that's probably just in time for not only you but for everyone and for the conversation. So, please feel free to join in this. I want to make sure that this is um, as useful for everyone as possible as we go through this today. Today we are going to be looking at discount data and Forms 470 for E-Rate. We will look at a number of different things as we go through the agenda for today. And on the agenda, we'll start with a look at discount data entry. We'll take a look at the Form 470 and go through a step-by-step with a couple of examples. We will look at and have a brief discussion about collecting bids based on your Forms 470 and bid evaluation. We'll also look at mini bids, which is something that is not unique to us, but something that is particularly important for us, we the folks in Kentucky, because of the way that our KETS networking equipment contracts are structured. And we will also look at spend a little bit of time talking about document retention, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end if there are any lingering questions. But as I mentioned before, please don't hesitate to jump in and ask a question. If you want to drop it in the chat, I'm sure that Caprice or others, Bruce or some of the other KEs will jump in and draw my attention to it as we go forward. So, without any further ado, and to save you some eye strain, I will take my picture off of the screen and I will share you my screen instead so that you are able to see what I'm looking at. Okay. I'm going to assume, since I've got the red button that, or the red border, that you all can see. Caprice, are we looking good here? Okay, excellent. Thank you. All righty, so I'm going to start with discount data. For those of you who have been through this process, this discount data form is going to look fairly familiar. For those of you who are new to your role in Kentucky and or with E-Rate, this will be new, so I will encourage you to pay some close attention, because this is going to be particularly important, not only for you, for your discount, but also for the state of Kentucky's consortium that we have built around our KEN network. That state application that we do for E-Rate is based in large part, well, our discount rate and our discount data is. Amy, no, we have not sent those out yet. I'll get to a little bit of a discussion about that. But we've, I forgot what I was going to say. Well, anyway, these will be coming out. I'm glad you actually mentioned that, Amy. The discount data sheets are in progress right now. We're working on them. We've just received the data from Infinite Campus from our data team on Thursday last week. So having to do 170 of these, 170 plus, it takes a little extra time. Each one requires quite a few steps to prepare it for you. So we don't have those out yet. I do anticipate that you will be receiving them early next week, probably. Well, I won't say probably, but hopefully sometime around Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. That is certainly my target, is to get them out ASAP. The work that's associated with them is also running into some issues that we have in terms of some audits going on. So there's been some balancing of time that has been taken away from what would have normally been a part of the preparations for this. I will say in our defense that this is probably the earliest that we've gotten our data out of Infinite Campus, and if we can get it out next week, it will still be probably the first time in 4 or 5 years that we've been able to get it out ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday. So I do think we're doing well in terms of keeping to a schedule that we normally follow on a yearly basis. So what you're going to receive when this is sent out is you'll receive this form, and it will start with just basically a blank form. It's going to have your district name, the school names that we have on record. Those school names will have, and the information such as USAC entity number will be pre-populated for you. This information comes out of EPIC, and we've cross-referenced it as much as possible to make sure that everything reflects what is online in EPIC, as well as for what we have in Infinite Campus. There are, however, occasionally some discrepancies. Sometimes there's a little bit of a difference in the name of the entity. We'll talk about how we can correct those situations in EPIC when we get to taking a look at where all of this information will ultimately go. So you'll receive this blank form. You'll see that we've got fields here for rural and urban. That will be pre-populated. If it is blank, then your district is considered to be urban. If there's a Y in each one, then each of these buildings is considered to be rural, and whether or not your district is classified as rural or urban overall is based upon the number of schools in your district that are considered rural. If you have more than 50% of your school buildings in a rural location, then the district itself is going to be classified as rural overall. The total NSLP eligible students, total enrollment, all of this information we will discuss here very briefly when we look at the Infinite Campus data that comes that is going to be associated with what we send out. So the other tab on this sheet will be the IC Data tab. You click on that, and you'll see now that what we have here is the output from Infinite Campus. What we've done is we have gone through and identified the date in the month of October that has the highest percentage within your district, the highest percentage of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. What that does is it helps maximize your discount percentage with respect to the E-rate program. Now, all that having been said, you'll notice that there is a date here that identifies the date that yields you that highest percentage. You are not required to use that particular date. If you have some day within the month, within the current school year, okay, and that's a key and important point. Within this school year, ahead of next year's funding year, that yields you a higher percentage, and if it yields you a higher discount percentage, and that's probably the most important thing, is if you get a higher discount percentage, then I would recommend you go ahead and use whatever data that you have for that particular date. You'll make sure that when it comes to the discount data form, that at the bottom of it, your date of data, when you go to file to finish this off, reflects that particular date that you chose. Make sure that you keep a copy of the data that you used and be able to identify where you extracted it from. It's very, very important. So you'll see here that we've got a couple of different columns. F and G are just individual breakdowns of free and reduced. Column H identifies your total free and reduced eligible. And then column I is your active enrollments. That's the number of students enrolled at that particular school on that particular date. What we're going to ask you to do is, if you are going to use the Infinite Campus data that we've provided, we will have you then transfer this data for example, school district 20. This is school A. I forgot. Yeah, school A. Oops. And so we'll take the active enrollments for school A, go over to our discount data form, and paste in the number there. Easy enough. You can do the same with each of the schools that you plan to use this data for. So now you're starting to build out the information. There are other ways. Oops. Okay. If it doesn't increase your discount percentage, only use a different date. If it doesn't decrease your, but it does increase, but does increase enrollment. Bruce, rephrase that question for me, please.
Yeah, you were mentioning don't use it if it doesn't. I mean, it's not valuable to use it if it's a different date, if it doesn't increase your discount percentage. But if it doesn't increase your discount percentage and it doesn't decrease it, but it increases your enrollment, you probably want to look for a different date, wouldn't you think?
I don't think it'll be, quite honestly, I don't think it'll matter, because unless you're planning on requesting an update to your Category 2 budget, it's really not, that's really not going to improve your standing or your discount or any funds that you can receive one way or the other. Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
Okay.
So if you'd want to submit a request to increase your or change your budget, Category 2 budget, is what you're saying. Yes.
Exactly. For what it's worth, we'll back up and give a little context to that conversation. The Category 2 budget is based upon your enrollments. You have the option to reset your Category 2 budgets based upon an increase in enrollment. If your enrollment has increased over the past 4 years, you can request that budget be adjusted to reflect that increase in enrollment, which would make some sense if you've seen that happen. My experience so far is that in most cases, districts are finding that they've been their student enrollments have been decreasing. So it would actually be counterproductive to ask for, in those instances, it would be counterproductive to ask for an update on your Category 2 budget. Also be aware that the 24-25 funding year is going to be the last year of the current 5-year budget cycle, after which budgets are going to be reset completely next year ahead of 25-26 funding year. And that's the point at which perhaps maximizing enrollment might be the better way to approach your discount data. So it's really what we're dealing with today is really more focused on the establishing the highest possible discount rate rather than the highest possible budget. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good. Okay. Where's CEP? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to get into CEP right away. You have two options. One is you can use, as we've shown, the data here that we've got in terms of the free and reduced, the total free and reduced, and you can enter those here as well. And that's certainly your choice. You don't have to, but you don't have to use these. And in fact, for schools that are participants in the community eligibility program, or the provision, I guess it is, that last P is provision. Those districts are allowed to use a slightly different discount calculation those schools do not collect NSLP forms because part of the rules that go around CEP is that you're not actually allowed to collect NSLP forms. What happens for those districts is that a percentage of students that are automatically qualified and automatically identified as being eligible through their participation or their household's participation in other federal programs that provide assistance to people in need. Those programs, their participation in those programs then automatically identifies those students as being eligible for free or reduced lunch. Because those districts don't collect the actual forms, they can't come up with a number that shows whether those students are NSLP eligible or not. So what the folks at E-Rate and the folks at the Department of Education, or excuse me, the Department of Agriculture, the folks that run the school lunch program, they've decided that they use a multiplier starting with the percentage of students that are automatically identified as being eligible, those CEP direct certification percentage, or ISP, those identifiable student population, I think is what that, or identified student population, that's what ISP stands for. This is the percentage of students that are automatically identifiable as being eligible for free or reduced lunch. So let's say that school district B actually does not have NSLP students. So we wouldn't have anything listed there. I'm going to place a Y in the column for indicating it's a CEP school. And then in the CEP direct cert percentage, you're going to probably have to have a conversation with your food service folks. Talk to your food service director and request a copy of and maintain your copy of that. Make sure that you hold on to it to identify how many or what the percentage is of students in your district that are eligible for national school lunch, or that are identified as already eligible for NSLP. So that percentage should be, well, in most cases, that individual percentage is going to be based at the school level. Sometimes those are grouped, but more often than not, that's going to be a number that's higher than 40%. If it's lower than 40%, then that's it's an unusual situation, but that school is probably grouped with another set of schools that has a higher percentage, which is something that they are allowed to do according to NSLP rules, the CEP rules. Nevertheless, for this, you're going to obtain that percentage, and let's just say that in this case, it's 42.3%. And you'll notice then that it did some calculation, and as you can probably figure out pretty quickly, 42% of 215 is not 146. What happens actually is that the students that are identified as being automatically eligible for free lunches, that calculation does not include students who would be eligible for reduced price lunch. So what the Department of Agriculture did was they built in an accommodation, if you will, to that. So that what happens is that you take that 42.3% and you multiply it times 1.6. And actually, I think if we looked at you can see that in the formula that does the calculation for this, that the factor is still, it's 1.6. So this multiplies, let's escape before that messes anything up. So this actually essentially multiplies this times 1.6 and then does the calculation of how much is that out of 215. And if you do the math on this, if your direct certification percentage is 63%, I believe it is, and above, you will automatically have all of your students in that school considered for E-rate purposes to be eligible for free and reduced lunch. So you'll enter that ISP. The calculation is made for you in the base year column. This is the year that the number that you've got right here in column G was established, okay? This can be confusing because CEP base year is used differently in terms of its meaning or its definition by E-rate versus the way that the Department of Agriculture uses the term. So don't confuse what USDA does with what USAC is asking, and what USAC is asking is, what year was this number established? And that is where you want to enter then the year, and this might be 2021, for example. This will be somewhere within the last 4 years. If it is not, you want to probably double check and go have a conversation again with your food service director just to make sure that you are on the same page. Because if it's outside of last 4, sometimes 5, you would that would mean that this is no longer eligible for use in either USAC terms or USDA. So it should be within the last 4, and occasionally, like they have what they call a grace year that can give a 5th year of eligibility under CEP. Nevertheless, we've now got basically a full set of calculations. However, what is missing, you might notice, is up here. It's still only showing that our district NSLP eligible is 95. What you need to do is to copy this number over to this column D. So what's in column I needs to be replicated in column D. So you just type in the 146, and now you'll notice that it does the full calculation. We've now got the proper 391 enrollment and 241 eligibility. You'll notice that then it automatically calculates for you that you are eligible for an 80% discount for category 1 and an 80% discount for category 2. So far, so good. Any other questions? Let's see. If we are a CEP district, do we still report the specific student numbers as you have, or do we include all students? You break it down by it's broken down by building, Justin. So yeah, there's going to be some little there is going to be a breakout of your totals. The totals will be calculated up here. Similarly, it gets calculated like that in Epic. What is the name of the report? You know what, Billy Joe, that's a really good question, and I'm going to throw that one out to everybody online, because I'm not sure that I know the name of the report that's going to generate that, but I meant
just a question, Scott,
yeah.
for Justin's question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming, since he says he's a CEP district, the numbers that he would get would be from what his food service give him, rather than what's you supply on the IC pool. And so
yes, that's true.
I think that's what he's asking is, do I use your numbers, put my percent in, or do I use food service direct cert numbers? They're going to have a new set of numbers.
True. And that ISP report will probably have an enrollment. Well, I know it has an enrollment on it, as well as the ISP. So if that enrollment is different than what is in the IC data that we're giving out, roll with what's in the report that you're using for the ISP. So that's a really good point. That might have 223 instead of 215. I don't think it'll be a huge difference, but there might be a little bit of a difference. Probably calculated on a slightly different day, so there's probably a slightly different enrollment. But yes, go with what your documentation supports in terms of the enrollment and the ISP, and then notice that it does it recalculated just a little bit. Very good question. The other question, one of the other questions that we had early Ben, the base year, I just used that as an example. The year that you will put in on yours is based upon the year that the ISP itself was calculated. Okay, so that's basically the data year, I believe it's referred to on those reports. I've seen copies of them before. It's not the cycle year. The cycle year is the year that that you're establishing your CEP eligibility for. It's whatever year that this percentage comes from. That could be as far back as 4 or in some cases 5 years. So it won't necessarily be 2023. Now, it could very well be 2023. So if a new CEP percentage is being used ahead of the funding year and you've got the data to support it, then you would use that. And then certainly over here, you would just put in 2023. So again, it's whatever year this ISP was first established for use in the program. Good. All right. Needless to say, you will need to repeat that process for each of the schools in your district. I would ask that as you go through this process, you also make sure that things like school names are adjusted to match state records, so that there's the ability to cross-reference. You should have, if there's any question on which school we're talking about, you can also cross-reference with the USAC school entity number as well. And we'll take a look at that information here in just a second. The one thing I did want to mention before we move on is that this ISP calculation, in some cases, that may include preschool students. Now, in the state of Kentucky, preschool is not eligible for E-rate support. So that means that you really, if at all possible, and again, this is one of those things where it may be dependent upon the report and the capacity of your reporting systems to calculate this, but you would need to do your level best to factor out any preschool eligible students before establishing exactly what that ISP is. So if you can't, then go with what documentation you have in terms of the ability to support that. If you can, however, if you are able to factor out the preschool so that this percentage does not reflect preschool, then absolutely you should do that to make sure that you are doing everything you can to maintain your compliance with the program rules. So once you've got this complete, then the next step is going to be to enter or update your data within the EPIC system, the E-rate Productivity Center, your E-rate portal, if you will. Now, I've already logged in. You can see I'm using the training site. When you get to once you've logged in, you want to make sure that you're on your landing page. The way that you need to, or the way that you can go and update these figures, is to start by clicking on your welcome school, the welcome text in your welcome school district, and then note that, let's see, we have a couple different ways that I think we can do this. One is, yeah, there we go. There's our list here. Oh, they don't. Okay. Go to your additional information so that you can actually access each individual school. We're going to go to additional information. I'm going to use the drop downs for related organizations and related entities. And you note now that we've got our related entities. We have School District A. We're going to start with School District A since it's our first on the list. We will click on that. Now, you'll note that right now you cannot really make any changes. It doesn't seem like the system's going to let you make any adjustments. However, if you come up here and click Manage Organizations, go ahead and click on that. This will actually now open up the information so that it is editable. And I would encourage you, see, once again, as I mentioned, if there are any discrepancies in school name, this is where you want to make sure that what you have over here on the discount data form matches up with what's in EPIC. This continues to be something that at the consortium level, we have ongoing attempts to align all this data so that it matches up. It tends to be something that we spend a lot of time on during PQA and PIA and audits, things of that sort. Certainly, the closer that we can get everything to matching up, the easier it is not only for us at the state level, but also for you. It allows us to then be the full support that we can be. For example, when you receive questions about your applications, oftentimes we at the state level are asked to validate or verify information. This will make it easier for us to be able to do that for you so that we can make sure that all of these, the data for each school lines up exactly between EPIC and what you have listed in there and what the state has as well. But you did notice, I'm sure, that this now has made all of these fields editable, and you're going to scroll down toward the bottom. One of the things also that you need to make sure is that for each building, if any of these items is applicable to the school that you're looking at, that these get checked off. General use schools are often well, they are schools or school buildings where you have a, for lack of a better word, I guess, like a transient population. You have certain groups of students that go to that building for a short period of time and come back. Those kids are counted at other locations. And so they're not going to be counted. The general use school, you're probably going to be entering, well, I'm sure you'll be entering zeros when it comes to your number of students, because you have no enrollment for a school where the kids come in and out. This is oftentimes the way that vocational schools, your ATCs, your CTCs, those are going to be, in most cases, those are going to be general use schools. Sometimes you have an old school building that that you use for some instruction, but there isn't a full-time population there. That's another good example of a general use school. So we're going to make sure now that our numbers match up. And we're looking at building A, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Yep, school A. All right, so school A has a total enrollment of 176. So we're going to say our enrollment is 176. We'll update that. School A is not a CEP school, so we're going to say no here. And you'll notice that it changes a little bit the questions that are asked. So now you're going to have the ability to update this number, and it says this is your total NSLP eligible students. So here we're going to enter 95. And then it asks if it's an alternate discount method. If you used something like a survey rather than something directly out of Infinite Campus, or rather than your counts based upon NSLP forms being sent out and submitted back in. that would be where you would indicate that you've used an alternative discount method. If you are using CEP, that's really not relevant. That's CEP already identifies that. So we'll talk about that in just a minute when we do School B. Does the school have an endowment? Probably not. If it is, as long as it's not more than 50 million, you're fine. You're in good standing there. It does allow you to put in the state school code, the LEA code, NCES codes, district code, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to enter those. Those are not required fields. It can be helpful, particularly for people who are reviewing your applications. The folks at USAC, it does help them if, for example, there is a discrepancy in the name from one school to another, that if you have a state school code or something of the or an NCES code, that will help them cross-reference to make sure that they understand exactly which building you are talking about in terms of the data that you've entered. And then you'll notice that we have the Category 2 budget information. It does discuss here you are allowed to reuse your Category 2 student count from year to year within a Category 2 budget cycle. So it only needs to be updated technically once every 5 years. This total students for C2 budget came from the original application the original discount data that we processed a couple of years ago on this. Unless you are planning to update it, I would just leave it alone. There is literally no reason to be messing around with that at this point, and you don't need to include your FCC registration number that is already established at the district level for purposes of participation in the program. All districts are required to have an FCC registration number to participate in the program. So if you've been participating, that part of it has already been taken care of. So once you've got everything as you feel like it needs to be, everything is updated, you simply click submit. And if you want to call this, give it a name, you can call this 2024 update so that you can keep track of what was changed and when it changed and why it changed. So there's our school district A, or excuse me, school A. We're going to move on to school B, related organizations, related entities. Oh, is that a word? No, here we go. Additional information, related organizations, related entities. If you plan on updating the number because the district grew, would it provide you additional category? Yes. The short answer to that, Jeff, is yes. If you plan on updating the number because the district grew, you would definitely want to update that number at the bottom, and then I think it's under the Category 2 budget heading is where you can request an updated Category 2 budget. You actually do have to update all those numbers first before you request that. Otherwise, they'll use the numbers that are already in there. So, don't jump the gun there until you've made sure that all of the district or all the building information has been updated. All right, so school district 20, school B, same kind of thing. Going to have to manage the organization in order to open it up. Again, make sure that your classifications, your information are all up to date. In this case, we'll scroll down now. And we'll update our numbers. Let's see, we've got 223 enrolled. Oops. And this, well, yes, no kidding. Thank you. But that'll update when we click on yes for the CEP program. There we go. So here we're going to start with then entering the CEP percentage, the direct cert percentage, or the ISP. That is 42.3. 42.3. The CEP base year is 2023. You can use whatever we want there. Notice that it only gives you those last 5 years, or yeah, well, last 4 years. So we'll make sure that we get 2023 in there. You'll notice that as soon as you entered the CEP percentage, the 151, the total number of students eligible was automatically updated for you. You don't have to enter that. All you have to enter is the full-time students and the CEP percentage, as well as the base year, and it automatically calculates that for you. Again, state codes, NCES codes, et cetera. All of those can be updated if you feel like that would be beneficial to you. And then we will submit. Again, update. And we will submit. Alrighty. So I think that covers, for the most part, entering that information into Epic. Make sure that I've got list, form. Good. Any questions at this point about the discount data that we're going to send and updating it within Epic?
Just one question,
Yeah.
Scott. Obviously, we have many districts that merge schools, add schools, remove schools, all of that. Are you covering that at a later point, or is this a good point to?
That's a great point. Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that now. If you have schools that are, if your school structure, let's just call it that for a lack of a better term, the structure of your schools is changing. You're adding a building. If you are adding a building, you need to make sure that that building has an entity number. You will need to call Client Service Bureau, and Caprice has already conveniently dropped the phone number in at the top of the chat. It is 888-203-8100. Make sure that you use 888 rather than 800. I won't tell you what kind of line you get if you type in 800, but it's kind of like the old whitehouse.com versus whitehouse.gov. If you remember that old story, that should give you some idea of the fact that you're not going to really want to talk to those people. You need to talk to USAC. So make sure you do that. 888-203-8100. They will ask you a few questions. They may ask for some additional documentation to verify that you have the new building in place. But you do need to obtain an entity number for that building. You will need to do that before you get too far into the process of updating all of this discount data, because you really don't want to have to bounce around. I would say you want to do that first before you start dealing with that. And no matter what your situation is, if you've got, like, for example, 2 schools that are merging, they will probably, in all likelihood, what they will do is establish a new building. And then they will deactivate those two older buildings that are being merged. If you've had a school that just straight up closed, as far as the discount form is concerned, please remove it from the list. If it's no longer an active building from KDE's point of view, and at least to a certain extent, at least going forward from USAC's point of view, that should not be included in any applications. And so your discount data should reflect the fact that that is no longer an eligible location or an active location. You may have a building, for example, that closes, but it is no longer going to be housing students, but the building is going to remain in the possession of the district, and it might be turned into a warehouse, for example, which means it's going to be a non-instructional facility. Your non-instructional facilities, which, by the way, on this discount data form, are listed here at the bottom as well. What you share with them is with the person that you talk to on the phone, is that they'll walk you through the process of whether you're consolidating this one, that one. That school will probably be in its being reclassified will receive a new USAC entity number. Jason, I don't have to file for a new one if my current middle school is getting a new building and transferring everything from the. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it's just an address change. And so, Jason, when you go through the process of updating your organization, you can change the physical location. Yeah, you just change the physical address within the profile for that particular building. So yeah, really good question. Yeah, new middle school being replaced. Yeah, built to replace the old one. So yeah, you're really not going to have any changes there other than the physical address. That you can do on your own. So really good question though. Thank you. I will come back to this real quick in wrapping things up, and the date of data is going to be, if you're using any of the IC data, the in-campus data that we've sent you, please use the date that's listed here in column J. If you are using CEP data, then I would use the date from when the date that report was generated for you. And if you are using both, then I would list the date that the largest, the majority of the data comes from. So if you're using majority CEP data, use the CEP date for the date of data. If you are using a majority of IC data, then use the date listed on that IC tab. Make sure that you sign it, and then the date that you're signing and submitting it back to us. And then we'll ask that you would send that back to both Caprice and myself so that we can process that and make sure that it is in our aggregate information. We take this data and we compile it so that it has all the districts on it, and then we send it off to USAC, because they will then use that to verify the data when they start reviewing your applications after you've submitted your Forms 471. So it's very, very important that what is on this sheet matches what is in Epic. If you report something on the discount data sheet and we report it on the information that we submit in our state valid file, that's what they call it, and there's a discrepancy between that and what's in your Epic portal, it's going to be incumbent upon you to provide documentation to support why there's a discrepancy there. So you want to make sure that everything is matching, and if you get those kinds of questions going forward, and what you submit to us matches what's in Epic, we will be more than happy to provide you with the letter that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. Kind of refer to it as a get out of jail free card, so to speak. It's a very common question during PIA for them to ask for validation of your discount data from a third party, and that would be us. Any additional questions as we wrap this up? Did I get everything that, Bruce, you were thinking of there?
Yes, sir. I don't think there are any other questions on here that are pertinent to this topic right now, so I think we're good.
Okay. All righty. Okay, good deal. All right, then I will move on to the Form 470. All right, so let's get this back in the nice middle here. All right, so as you're getting ready to submit your Forms 470, we're basically using the Form 470, as I'm sure most of you are aware, to tell the world that you need a certain set of services. I'm going to click on that link at the top right to start a new Form 470. It's going to ask you for a nickname, You can call it whatever you like. I suggest very strongly that you try to give it a nickname that will help you remember what it is that you're requesting. So and I'm just using this as an example. Category 1, WAN 2024. So if you're getting ready to go out and request WAN connectivity, connections between your buildings, that would be a good example of a common request for services. You give it a nickname that you're going to be able to remember. Or excuse me, that's going to help you remember what this particular request is for. Save and continue. The next couple of pages are really just review for you to make sure that your profile the data is accurate and that it has been that your application here, or excuse me, your service requests on 470s is going to contain the accurate information. So we'll save and continue again. No consulting firms. If you have a consulting firm, you will need to make sure that you are updating your organizational profile with your consultant's information. I suspect that most of you who are listening right now don't have consultants, and that's why you're listening right now. Are you the main contact person? Yes, it'll automatically enter you. If you say no, it's going to ask who. You will have to make sure that the main contact person is a user in Epic. If you have any questions about how to do that, there are some really good videos on how to add users that USAC has. If you don't know where those are or need some to find those, please don't hesitate to give a shout to myself or Caprice, and we'll be happy to send you a direct link to those if you need them. I've always used, for example, if I WAN 470. Sure. Yep, that's a good example. All right, so what are the categories of service that you are requesting? Unlike a Form 471, on a Form 470, you can request things under both Category 1 and Category 2. The meticulous person in me likes to have sort of a one-to-one connection or a ratio to go with. Like for all of my Category 1 services, I would personally prefer to have a single Form 470 that goes Category 1 and then a separate one for Category 2. That's just probably the obsessive compulsive person in me. You can do both on a single Form 470 and request multiple different kinds of services at the same time. Oh, yeah, sorry. With Category 1, you notice there that when I saved and continued and it didn't, I hadn't responded, that it gave you some red text. If ever you save and continue and it doesn't take you to the next page, make sure that you scan the page to see where you might have missed something. The red text will point you in that direction. We'll save and continue. Is there an RFP for any of the services that you are requesting? I'm not going to use an RFP example right now. That having been said, RFPs are important in that if you are interested in obtaining pricing at the very least, if not obtaining services for dark fiber or self-provisioned networks on the Category 1 side, you are required to have an RFP. So you will need to make sure that if dark fiber or a district-owned network is what you're interested in, definitely you're going to have that. Otherwise, an RFP is not required for anything else within the world of E-Rate. The example we're using now is pretty simple. I'm going to use an example of looking for or requesting Category 1 services for lit fiber, so I'm just going to say no at this point in time. I will say that for those of you who have more complicated service requests, please don't hesitate to give us a call, give your KE a call. We'd be happy to establish a meeting, and we can walk you through your own individual instances if you feel like you would benefit from having some additional eyes or some additional assistance as you go through the process. All right, so there are no current, yeah, okay. So we're going to add a new service request. We're going to say, all right, so now it's going to start by asking you, all right, so it's going to ask about these Category 1 services. I seek bids for internet access and or data transmission service, or I seek bids for Category 1 network equipment or maintenance and operations. That's a pretty complicated one. We're not going to get into that. Again, if you are interested in Category 1 networking equipment, let's have a conversation. Call, email, let's set up a meeting, and we'll discuss your individual instance and help you walk through that process. But we're currently going to use the example of internet access and or data transmission. I seek bids for for internet access and data transmission service for, I think, every district in Kentucky. This is not the one. The top one is asking for whether you want internet access and data transmission service. You want data transmission service between your buildings for certain. What you don't have is internet access between them. So you are not actually going to be seeking this top one. And you'll notice that the second one is I seek bids for internet access without data transmission service. That is exactly the opposite of what we're looking for. The third option, I seek bids to purchase data transmission service only, i.e. that does not include internet access service. That's the one we want. Obviously, we talked about if you're looking for a district-owned network, then the fourth one is going to be the one that you're going to select. But in our instance, we just need connection between our buildings. So this first one, I seek data transmission service without internet access service. That's pretty straightforward. What it doesn't say is I'm seeking lit fiber service. That's basically what you're saying, although it doesn't quite exactly say it that way. The second one is I seek to lease capacity, a specific number of dark fiber strands or capacity over a leased network, lit network. So this first one is for lit only. The second one is for dark and lit. Remember that if you are seeking dark fiber and or lit fiber, you would need an RFP. And this will set things up for you so that you can request both of those in the same in this same step-by-step process. We are, again, talking about seeking lit fiber service. So we're going to go with the first one. It does say, it's this red text here is just a reminder. It says the service does not include internet access service. If this option is selected, the applicant will have to procure internet access service separately. You will actually not have to go ahead and procure it yourselves because it is provided through your KEN connection. So you can sort of disregard that particular question. So it's going to ask you for a quantity. Here we're talking about lit fiber, so we're talking about a number of circuits. This is going to be, yes, KEN NGKI, yeah. I don't know if KEN is going by the wayside in terms of the terms, but yeah, you're right, Bruce. That's a good point. I think, yeah, Mike and David and other folks have been referring to it as NGKI, so I will try and adjust my brain and my mouth to match that. So your quantity is going to be the number of circuits that you're seeking. Let's see, our example here, we've got 3 locations, so we're going to need 3 circuits. We'll just call it that for now. This next step is going to be very important to make sure that you have options for your future. Over the course of whatever contract might be struck from this process, if you have an interest or a need to increase your bandwidth, if you don't ask for pricing that is included above and beyond your current level of service, you would have to come back out to bid for faster services. If, however, you have gone out and priced faster service than you are actually going to use, because you've actually priced it out now, as long as it's built into your options in your contract, you can increase your bandwidth in future years as long as the contract is still valid, based upon whatever contract pricing was established during this process. So make sure that your minimum capacity might be exactly what you've got now. So let's just say that it's 1 gig. Your maximum capacity, well, you don't know. Somewhere down the road, 2, 5, 10 might be necessary, but who knows? Somewhere in the next 5 years, somebody might come out with, the latest and greatest thing that just gobbles up bandwidth. I mean, when we look at bandwidth usage, it continues to rise fairly quickly. So I would encourage you to ask for pricing at least 1 or 2, if not 3 or 4, maybe even 5 steps above where you currently are, so that you have as many options available to you as you would like going forward. The number of entities served is going to be all of the entities within your district, I would assume, although it might be 1 fewer because your NGKI connection comes into one of your buildings, and you may only have connections out from that building to others. I'm just going to use that because it matches with the number of buildings that we currently are playing with in this environment. Then it asks you, are you also seeking installation, activation, and initial configuration for this service? I always recommend you say yes here. Why? Because if you don't request it now, you can't get it funded later. You can always, going forward, decide that you don't want those services later on down the road, and that's fine. You're not penalizing yourself in any way, shape, or form for saying yes now and then deciding later you don't want it. But you will be penalized in the sense that you won't be able to request funding for installation, activation, initial config going forward if you say no now. So don't hamstring yourself. Make sure that you're keeping your options as open as possible. All right, so we're going to save our request. There is the basics of our request, and then it asks for a narrative. Note that it's asking for disqualification factors, additional information about eligible locations that will be receiving the services, other information about services requested that would help bidders develop bids that are responsive to your needs. This is particularly important when you don't have an RFP. So in this instance, I would say very clearly that you want connections between these buildings. I would list out the locations of them. I would put the street address. Even though it's available in Epic, it's not necessarily immediately available to a bidder who won't necessarily be able to see that physical address. I would put the addresses that would be served in this narrative, along with any things like disqualification factors. You might, if you have technical specs beyond just bandwidth that you are expecting them to meet, make sure that you include those in here as well. And then last but certainly not least, let's see, we got connections between locations in the district. Obviously, I'm just using this as a real quick example. You would want to be more detailed than that. Are you seeking an installment plan for the non-discounted portion of any special construction charges? If you know, for example, that there's going to need to be some build out in order for a provider to establish new connections to you, then, and you want to be able to pay them off over time rather than all at once in the first year, you would definitely say yes here. Doing so then asks you over how many years. You might say it allows you to go up to 4. Excuse me. yeah, 1, 2, 4 gives a minimum and maximum. And would you prefer annual or monthly payments? Obviously, you can identify that as you like, whatever suits your interests. Obviously, if it's not something you're interested in, you would just pay for the construction right up front. You would say no. Again, it's one of those things where you're keeping your options open, so it can't hurt to say yes here. Error. That just because you request it does not mean that the service provider will actually have to give you the option on the installment plan. They are not required by E-rate rules to actually give you an installment plan if you ask for it. This is just one of those things where if they will allow that, then certainly it might be helpful for you. But be aware that you just because you ask for it doesn't mean you will necessarily get it in the end. Save and continue. So we've added our service requests. Let me come back to that. I'll take back real quick. This is our narrative that matches up with our service request that we put in the information. Again, we want to make sure that anything that we want our specifics that we want our service providers to be aware of, you definitely need to put them in here. So we'll save and continue. Is there a person who is a technical contact? That's probably going to be you anyway. Might not, but if it's not, once again, you're going to want to make sure that if you say yes, that you can use either somebody that's already within Epic, or you can enter their details manually. Again, probably it's going to be you. So we'll just use that as the example now, and we'll save and continue. Are there any state or local procurement requirements that apply to the procurement of your services sought? If you have some local ones, certainly I would add this. We will be sending out some standard sort of boilerplate language that you can use from a state perspective, particularly for Category 2 requests, because you are required to purchase from the state master contracts for things like networking equipment. There is a statement that we send out every year that basically says that you are required to follow CAT standards, and then references the state regulations that require that. We will send that out in the email, and that, as I say, will be pertinent more to Category 2 than Category 1. Then it moves on to the review of the FCC Form 470. It takes a few moments. There'll be an extra task that gets generated. Currently I have 14 that are sitting out there. There we go. Oh, not me. 10 hours ago. Really? I don't recall doing anything 10 hours ago. Sometimes this training site is a little flaky. There we go. All right. So you note that I had to refresh the page. You may have to do the same. Your task will be increasing by 1. We'll come back to then the Form 470, and it's going to take us into the certifications. Definitely, you want to take a look at this Form 470 that gets generated. Let's see where this pops up. I figured that would be the case here. Come on. Oh, for heaven's sakes, where did it go? There we go. All right. So review this, make sure that you don't find anything that's out of sorts, doesn't reflect reality. You want to make sure that, in fact, everything listed covers everything that you are asking for. Connections between districts. There's your basic service request. Everything looks good as long as you're satisfied with that. Check the box. And then you have 2 options. You can either continue to certification, or you can send it for certification. The send for certification option is there for instances where, for example, you may have a different person within your district who is authorized or is required to sign these documents. That is where you would use the send function. Anybody that you send it to will need to be an Epic user in order for them to access the tool and access the portal so that they can respond to that certification. That might be your superintendent, might be a finance officer, might be you. And if it is you, well, in that case, you don't need to send it to anyone. You just need to continue certification. Just a last note on sending to certification. What that does is it makes this makes this service request available to all of the full rights users in Epic that you have created. So any of them will be available. It doesn't send it directly to the individual person. So just be aware that it would be, sort of sitting out there, that anybody, if you have a decent number of folks in Epic, that they would be able to access it and look at it if they needed to. Bruce, I have a couple districts that have an administrative assistant who completes form for. Yep. That's a perfectly good example. That's a really good example, Bruce. Yeah, that's precisely this kind of situation. They fill it out, they send it for certification, it becomes available to the full rights users. Then that CIO comes in, logs in, goes to their tasks, finds that probably going to be sitting right at the top, like it was just a moment ago for me, and then click on it. It'll come here, review the form, check it off that you've reviewed the form, and then continue to certification. This function will send you directly to the certification for your FCC Form 470. Are you sure you wish to proceed? Well, yes, I am. Thank you very much. And now we have a whole series of certifications that we're going to make. I'm not going to read each one of these to you. I encourage you, though, to read each one of them, because you are attesting in a very true legal sense that you understand the rules of the program and that you are abiding by them. So you're going to certify. This one deals with endowments and for-profit operations. You're certifying that you'll have the bid on the street for 28 days, and you'll follow the competitive bidding rules. You're going to retain your documentation. You're complied with any state and local kinds of procurement rules. I can be held civilly liable or criminally liable depending upon the situation. Using the stuff for educational purposes. And I know that this information can change in the future, and I'm not necessarily eligible for support every year, et cetera, or those, your level of eligibility may change. Take a few moments to read through those so that you know what you are attesting to. And then last but certainly not least, you are ready to certify it. It's going to give you a little kind of, this is going to civil criminal prosecution liability, blah, 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 blah. Are you sure? Yes, of course, we're sure. It's a lot like your taxes, quite honestly. It feels a little threatening, but I don't think so. I don't think it's really meant to do that, but it can be a little intimidating, especially the first time through. All right, so we have created a Form 470. That kind of step-by-step process. The step-by-step process is very, very similar when it comes to requesting Category 2 Category 2 equipment. And when I say that, that is a reference to equipment that is not on a state contract. Obviously, if it is on a state contract, you have to go through a different process, and we will talk about that in just a few moments. Questions over the step-by-step that we just did, if there are any?
I have a couple of questions, but I don't want to jump in unless there's a district that doesn't have any questions. Okay, one, Sometimes Scott, I ask questions that districts have asked me behind the scenes. sometimes,
Mhm.
sometimes I know the answer already, but I want the whole audience to hear. So
Sure.
one of the questions was, I'm going out for bid for a WAN for fiber
Okay.
this year. Okay. And I know that I'm hoping to get like a 5-year contract and 1-year extensions for 10 years or whatever. But I know that I'm going to have a new building that's going to be built, and an additional building that's going to be built in a couple of years, and I'm going to have fiber for that. So to avoid that, having to have a separate RFP at that point, when I file my 470, should I go ahead and include that? I'm seeking that additional building, even though I'm not going to, it's not going to be applicable this year, but have it documented in my 470. And then when I get my 471, when I get my responses, hopefully they built in that into the contract and I award that for the 470 so that at future date I can add a line and I don't have to go out to bid again. Is that correct?
Here's the rub on that. And this gets really, really in the weeds, but it's really actually a very good question. First of all, yes, I would absolutely get pricing for it. If I know that there's going to be a new construction already, and I just don't know exactly when, here's what I would honestly do. I would say as long as the district owns the property where that building is going to go already, I would request an entity number for it. Because here's the thing. Only the entities that are listed on the Form 470 are eligible for services under that 470. In other words, if that building doesn't exist in any way, shape, or form, you can't add it later without having to go back to bid. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, it's really, really silly, quite honestly. I mean, that's the way I look at it. It's like we're really, really picking nits here, Net, out of pepper. Good luck, really. I mean, it's kind of silly. Nevertheless, the rules are what the rules are. So I would encourage you to, if it's even possible to know that yes, there's going to be a school in the future, and the district already has some sort of ownership over the new location, then yes, start by getting the entity number for it, classify it as a new school construction, put it on your Form 470, and you're good to go. You don't even have to put it on your Form 471 yet, but it does need to be on the Form 470. If you can't go through that, then unfortunately, you're probably just going to have to wait. You will have to bid it out once that building exists, once that property is owned, and it's ready for the connectivity that's going to come out to it. It's unfortunate that you can't just put a blanket statement, any new buildings, blah, blah, blah. It would be nice if you could. But definitely, if you know it's coming and you're in a position to be able to take advantage of that, definitely get the pricing for it on this from this Form 470 process. Get that pricing now so that you don't have to go back out later. Because if your contract doesn't include that location, even if your Form 470 does, you could be in trouble as far as that's concerned as well.
Exactly. Good answer, Scott. Yeah, and Damon added some context there, which is good.
Could a district also simply include language in the RFP that states any resulting contract also provides for the ability to add? Yeah, and that doesn't hurt. It's a question of whether or not you can establish that there is in fact a location, because if the location doesn't exist yet, you can't include them on the Form 470, and that's where you run into the issue.
Yeah, Scott, this is Damon. So the reason why I worded it that way, and I've had some districts use different language. Back, gosh, it's probably been 6-7 years ago, Fayette County Schools, which like a lot of the larger schools, I mean, they build a building every year, it seems like.
Yep.
And they had a internal fiber WAN contract with their provider. Maybe it was in year 2 or 3 of a 5-year contract. I forget exactly where in the lifespan it was. And in the original 470, 471, and even in part of the original documentation of the bid, the RFP bid, it listed, I think it was 67 sites, listed out the school building names, etc. And all of a sudden, Fayette County, they had built 68th school or the 69th, whatever it might have been. And there was a PIA review, and the PIA review person said, well, we're not going to fund this because you only had 67 listed in there. And we went back, and in the original bid, and which became part of the resulting contract, there was a paragraph along that lines that said, during the life of the contract, any additional school buildings that are built could be added in for the services at the same prices during the life of this contract. And we found that language, we highlighted it, we sent it to the PIA reviewer and said, so just because there were 67 buildings 2 years ago, we've built another building. The contract allowed language that said, hey, if we have another building, we can add it. We can get the same price for the fiber connection to that building. And the PIA reviewer goes, oh, okay, yep, that's fine, approved.
Interesting.
And so I have, within my region, I have started calling that the, quote, Fayette County clause that we add into just about every RFP, because that way then, whether it is built something from ground up 2 years into a 5-year contract, or whether it's a school district that ended up saying, hey, we're going to buy this building over here that's already pre-built. We're going to turn it into our new board office, and it has, there's very little renovations going to be done, and we need internet tomorrow. That would allow them to add that additional site at the same pricing during the term of that contract. And so far that has seemed to work out for districts in my regions. And it has to do with that language. Again, we call it the Fayette County clause. We've also got something else in our RFPs that typically we put in our region, and we call it the Clark County clause.
Okay.
The Clark County clause is several years ago, they reconfigured the use of their school buildings and actually stopped using a few of them. So they combined some schools, changed around grade levels in buildings, several different things. The challenge was their current contract at that time for fiber WAN did not allow any language for stopping services at buildings. And the telco said, don't care whether you're using those school buildings or not. You said those were buildings that you wanted to keep having internet to. There's no language that allows you to cut off the service, so we're going to keep charging you.
Wow.
And and I don't know.
Strong partnership skills.
Exactly. I don't know all the little itty bitty details, but out of that, we learned to include language in our RFPs to say, if during the life of the contract, within X number of days, and I've typically told my districts 90 to 120 days are typically a good time frame. 3 to 4 months, most school districts will know that, oh, we're getting out of that building at least 3 to 4 months ahead of time.
Yep.
And I think telcos typically would expect a 3 to 4 month heads up. And so we've started including language in RFPs that said, if during the life of this contract, service is no longer needed at a particular school location with a X number of day notice, the school district can request that service be turned off and no further cost incurred.
Excellent. I think that's, I honestly don't recall the instance with Clark County. so many years ago. It's probably just because, I'm old and forgetful at this point, but that's an interesting.
Yeah, it was one of those where it may have been whenever Mr. Sobolski was the CIO. It's been that long ago.
Okay.
Because we all know Jeff Sobolski is old. But yeah, it's, and again, I affectionately call them the Fayette County clause. We know there might be school buildings built or new facilities needed at some time during the life of the contract. Yep. Let's build some language into the contract to allow for extra sites to come online. And then the other, Clark County being, there may be buildings that get closed because of enrollment numbers or consolidation or whatever. Let's make sure we don't get stuck with an ongoing bill for months or even a few years left on a contract.
Absolutely. That is top quality advice there. Top quality.
So my second question to follow up with that, and thanks for that input, Damon. That's good stuff there. Was I noticed on the example 470 that you just completed, which was awesome, by the way. Thank you for going through the process there. You chose not to do the RFP process on that one. Right. Can you explain once again? A couple of people have asked, can you explain again, when would you not do an RFP and when would you do an RFP on a fiber WAN 470?
Sure. Good. You have three options when it comes to a build out or a WAN, a WAN build out. You have lit fiber, you have dark fiber, and you have self-provisioned. If you are seeking lit fiber and lit fiber only, you do not need an RFP. If you really want dark fiber, you must request both dark fiber and lit fiber bids, and you must have an RFP. If you want self-provisioned fiber, if what you really want is for the district to own it, you apply for self-provisioned, and then you also have to entertain bids for dark fiber and lit fiber. So if the district wants to own it, you got to go with three different options and compare all three. If you only want dark fiber, you got to at least compare dark and lit fiber. And then if you want just lit fiber, that's all you need, and there's no RFP required. Does that help?
Yes, for me it does. I think they clarified it very well. And maybe this is applicable now, but I know you know this because we had an instance in the last few months where a district was denied a fiber bid for connectivity between buildings because their initial 470 did not open up for all types of technology for connectivity between buildings. Is that applicable right now, or is that something later you want to talk about?
No, that is applicable here. The key is that you cannot. Let me back up. If you are seeking something other than just lit fiber, you cannot express a preference. That is absolutely I cannot more heavily emphasize that you cannot in any way, we would prefer this. This would be nicer to have than this. No, don't even come anywhere near that. You just say, we're accepting bids for all three of these things. Here are the technical specifications that whatever you submit to us must meet. That is going to be the key element that keeps you from having to, it allows you to say the same thing, but you're saying it with technical specs, okay? You're saying, I need it to be able to do this, this, and this. And, well, go figure, this, and this might not be able to be performed by anything but fiber. Okay, the instance I think that you were referring to was one where they stated that they had a preference for one over the other. And particularly when you get to the self-provisioned fiber request, it's actually not self-provisioned fiber, it's a self-provisioned network. And so that self-provisioned network, you actually have to entertain options beyond just fiber. So you have to copper, microwave, carrier pigeon. Look, we all know, we can call it what it is. It's ridiculous. It's silly. I'm not going to go out there right now and build a network that's based on copper. I'm just not. It's ridiculous. Nevertheless, the rules are what the rules are, and if they say you're not allowed to express a preference for one technology over the other, don't express a preference. That's just make sure that you clearly state, here's very specifically what this network has to be able to meet in terms of technical specs, and that will do it for you.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to bid evaluation, you can go, oh, well, copper won't do this. Copper won't do 10 gig. Thanks for playing. Appreciate your bid. Bye. It's that kind of thing.
In short, what happened in that one instance, and I know it's happened a couple of times, is the district used the word fiber.
Yes.
And didn't say and other technologies. If they had that phrase in there, they would have been fine, but they used just the word fiber. Of course, it's a lesson learned for all of us. So.
Yep. And when it comes to requesting equipment outside of the CETS options, the keywords are or equivalent. So even if you like, oh, well, I want my UPS to have the same capabilities as an APC 123456 model 123456 or equivalent. You can actually say, well, I want this or equivalent, but don't say we're just looking for APC's UPS. You know what I mean? Okay. Damon, your hand is back up.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more thing. It's like Bruce and I were playing tennis here. Something he says makes me think of something, and vice versa. And so obviously I like to call these things based upon experiences learned from particular districts. I call this one the Anderson County Clause. So I don't think this applies quite as much anymore because of the cost of fiber services going down. Vendors getting so much more aggressive. But back several years ago, Anderson County put into their RFP the desire to have 10 gig connections between their buildings back to their hub site. And I think that's where most of all of us have been going, is trying to have those 10 gig internal WANs. They were getting prices back that they were looking at prior to the final date, and the prices were unobtainium, to use a term that Chuck Austin likes to use. And so it hit us all of a sudden that we didn't have any provision, any language in the RFP to have 1 gig speeds or, 2 gig, 5 gig, something smaller that potentially could be financially palatable for the district. And so we did sweat it a little bit. Luckily, on the last day, a bid response came in that was very aggressive on 10 gig pricing. So they were able to get their 10 gig. But that made us think in our region that, hey, we probably ought to say we are requesting, speeds of anywhere from 1 gig to whatever. We ask that you provide prices for all of these different various speeds. And then some little section that says, these are the speeds we would like to have connecting each of our sites. So school A, 10 gig, school B, 10 gig, bus garage, 1 gig, or whatever it might be. And that way, then it allowed us to have the chance, if those 10 gig prices came in too expensive, we could always back down to 1 gig, because we had also requested pricing for those in the overall contract. And then that also led to a great discussion in our region where at times we'll have very, very small school facilities. It may be a location that only has 5 or 6 people at it. And for whatever reason, it's just not cost feasible to have fiber connections there. And so possibly something like a cable modem type speed that could then be coupled with a VPN connection back to the district, so that there could be a virtual private network, but we're using a much cheaper connection capability at that location. And so a lot of times I've seen some of my districts in Region 5 also include, hey, we're not saying we're going to buy these types of things, but we would like to know, what would your pricing be for cable modem services, 100 gig up and down, or I'm sorry, 100 meg up, 100 meg down, and so on. So that way, then they have other options already built into the resulting contract, so that at some time during the 5-year term or however long the contract is for, if they needed that service, they could then apply on a 471 for that service, because it was part of the original bid.
Sure. A word of caution about that approach, and that is, if you're going to ask for other options, make sure that you just ask for other options rather than necessarily, like you gave the example of the cable modem, which is a good example. It's a really good example. It's just that if you start identifying them, you start, I think in USAC's mind, you start in USAC's mind eliminating other options, and that's what you don't want to have the appearance of doing.
Usually usually the language would be something along the lines of, these others are not required to be bid, but if you have these services available, such as, for example, phrasing like that, and then just, I'll call it leave open-ended, that if they have those anything other than what we're asking in the core part of the bid, please feel free to include those types of services here.
Absolutely.
That way, then it just gives options, so to speak, if they're ever needed. And, most of the time they're not needed, but the day you need it, and then you have to go out for bid again, it's like, oh man, that's a pain. I wish I would have done that in the original bid.
Yeah, that's a good example. It's a good example. Kristen had a question regarding once self-provisioned, are you always self-provisioned? No. I mean, it's one of those things where if you build out a self-provisioned network, I'm going to use the example of fiber. Let's say that you've got a self-provisioned connection or pair of connections to your buildings. You have built that out. You've spent the money for building that. The district owns it. It operates it. That obviously that's going to be in place for a very long period of time because the district owns it and uses it. However, just because you've spent time as a self-provisioned network doesn't mean that when the network itself has come to the end of its useful life, that you necessarily have to stay self-provisioned for future future service providing or for future services. So when you would go back out after a self-provisioned network has been in place, I would suspect that you're probably still going to have that preference for self-provisioned, but you're not automatically stuck in it. And in fact, it would be quite the contrary. You will have to go through the full process all over again in terms of requesting lit fiber options, dark fiber options, and self-provisioned over third-party networks. Jared, I'm not sure I understand. That's a question. Would like proposals for self-provision?
I think
Go
what he's
ahead.
doing is he's given examples of the
Oh,
language he's used in his RFPs.
I
It's
see. Yes.
really, really solid language in both of those instances we've been talking about. So.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. Yeah. Good. All right. Okay, so let's see. We've been talking about RFPs. In terms of accepting bids, first of all, you probably are aware. If you're not, well, welcome to E-Rate. You have to have your 470 posted for 28 days, no less than 28 days, prior to then identifying a winner. I would highly recommend that you, in your narrative, and if you have an RFP, also put this in your RFP. Identify how bids are supposed to be submitted and give a clear and distinct cutoff date and time so that you can then clearly say, I'm sorry, this particular bid was submitted after the deadline. And you can, quite honestly, just straight up eliminate that bid because it was late. We had an instance, I think it was Maryland or somewhere, about a year and a half ago, that that had a school had not identified a specific deadline date. But after the 28 days, but before they started to do their bid evaluations, they received some additional bids, or at least an additional bid. They disqualified that bid because they said it was late. It was after the 28 days had run out. And FCC came back after ruling on it, or after adjudicating it, and said, no, if you do not clearly establish a deadline date, you must entertain all bids received between when you posted the Form 470 and when you started your bid evaluations. So really important, I think, to give clear deadline dates in the process. Let's see. Look here. Oh, okay, great. Thanks for posting that, Damien. Real good. You are allowed to have things like walkthroughs, a vendor walkthrough to come in and look at your building and give you, so that they understand what they're facing. Things like wiring projects is really important for things like that for vendors to know what they're in for. You can make those mandatory as a part of this, but you have to make sure that you spell that out very, very clearly, and make sure that you give them plenty of time to have the opportunity for that walkthrough before then closing your acceptance of bids. Just another one of those considerations that you want to be conscious of. If you get, I would suggest that after your bid deadline closes, that you send to yourself or maybe your superintendent just a single one-line kind of email that memorializes the fact that, hey, our bids closed today, and as of or our procurement closed today, and as of today, we have received X number of bids. 1, 2, 3. Doesn't matter. I wouldn't worry about how many. I would just say that as of this date, we've received X number. Same thing with 0 number of bids, okay? Same thing with if you've received no bids. You need to somehow memorialize that fact and document it. So that's an important piece of that process. When it comes to bid evaluation, remember that price must be your most heavily weighted factor, okay? You can have other factors. Technical specs, absolutely. You've got to make sure that whatever is being provided to you will meet the technical requirements that you have for their service or equipment. Come up with 5 or 6 different criteria that and I use this example fairly regularly, that price, for example, might earn 25 points toward a like 100 point total evaluation. You might have three technical specs, three different technical specs, and each of those might be worth 20 points. And then you might have a reputation or past experience with the service provider being a fifth criteria. And you might give that 15 points total. So obviously you can structure that any way you like, but make sure that the highest number of points is assigned to price. If you only receive one bid, make certain that you score that one bid, because you still, even if you only have one bid, and if that's going to be your service provider, that's fine, but you still have to demonstrate that, or be able to demonstrate that that was a cost-effective solution for you. The way that you do that is through a bid evaluation. Obviously, you would expect that that one bid would have earned a fairly high score, something that would probably have been a winner under most circumstances, even if you would have received multiple bids. But you are not guaranteed that something is cost effective just because it is the only option. So be aware of that in your bid evaluation process. Damon just mentioned the Clark County, Fayette County, and Anderson County clauses, all really good suggestions, so be aware of that. Also, something to be aware of, particularly on these leases, is that if the total cost or total value or cost of the lease is going to be more than $100,000 over the life of the contract, that you make sure that you are doing this quickly, because you need to make sure that if your bid isn't already out on the street, make sure that it gets out there soon. Why? Because that lease is going to require KDE's legal team to review it, and you should allow for 30 days for that process. So when you start doing the math on the dates, if you posted something December 1st, you're basically talking about end of December, 1st of January as to when you're ready to start evaluating those bids. If that takes you a week, now you're into the second week of January, and once you've gotten a contract signed or at least a contract hammered out between you and the provider, that might take another week. So now you're into the second week of January. Now the contract has to go to KDE Legal. An additional 30 days would put you into the middle of February. You're now starting to get in the neighborhood of when the 471 window will be closing. We don't know what the dates are yet, but if past experience in the last 3-4 years is any indication, you're probably talking middle to maybe latter half of March. So be aware of your timelines, and particularly with that KDE legal review that has to occur, make sure that you are building enough time into the schedule so that you can get all of those hoops jumped through prior to the Form 471, and leaving yourself with enough time so that your 471 can be submitted in a timely fashion. Mini bids. Mini bid is for if you are interested in or you're seeking KDE's equipment from KDE's contracts for networking equipment. You do not have to do a Form 470 for those. However, you do need to request a quote from all of the potential vendors, and I do mean all of them. So make sure that you're hitting up not only the OEMs that are in the business, but the resellers that are listed for each of those contracts as well. That list and those email addresses are on the KDE website with the E-rate eligible contracts, those KETS contracts. That page has contacts. Make sure that you are reaching out to each and every one of them. We just, in fact, yesterday received a request in a review of one of our districts that they asked specifically for a copy of the email where you requested the quote. and they wanted to be able to see that each of the resellers was in fact contacted via that email. So another important aspect of the mini bids. And then when you get it back, score it, score those quotes like you would score any other bid that was submitted to you, whether it was started with a Form 470 or not. And then when all is said and done, keep a copy of everything. And I do mean everything. And if you have phone conversations, it's probably not a bad idea, particularly if you've had a very important phone conversation, to document what that conversation was about. If you have questions that come in from your potential service providers and you provide them with clarifications about your RFP, and you realize, oh my goodness, maybe I wasn't quite as clear in my RFP as I needed to be. If you are providing clarifying information, you want to make sure that you provide that to all of the potential bidders. So it might not be a bad idea to have a little web page set aside so that if you get questions, that you can answer the questions and that you can answer them publicly, so that all of those answers and questions are in the same place and that all of your potential bidders have access to them. You can't just go and respond to a single question from a single vendor, because you put yourself at risk, because if the other vendors were to come back at the end of the process and say, hey, we didn't know about that, and that would have made a difference in how we responded with our bid, now you're going to be in trouble. You're going to put yourself in a bad situation. So document everything and make those questions public. And then, as I was saying, you want to keep copies of everything, and I do mean everything, and you want to keep them for 10 years from the last date to receive services. So when we're talking about, this kind of blows my mind when I start doing the math on this, but we're talking about now bids that will be for the 24-25 school year. By the time we get to the end of the 25 funding year, you add 10 years on that. Yes, we're actually talking about keeping that documentation until at least July 1st of 2035. That just blows my mind. I think more so because I remember thinking the same thing 10 years ago. So it is a rather arduous documentation retention schedule, but it is what it is. Bruce, I have districts included in the language to the RFP, a range of 2 to 3 days. District doesn't get overwhelmed by potential bidders wanting to come all. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Questions. I think I've kind of come toward the end of what I have to share today, and I do appreciate everyone's patience. I've been told many times that I talk too much. It's hard not to share as much as absolutely possible, because it's just some of the things that seem so small can actually end up being so big in terms of their long-term impact. And we want to make sure that you are not impacted in a negative way, but are in fact impacted in a positive way. Oh, one other thing just came to my head. Contracts. If you are in any way, shape, or form interested in having contracts that can be extended, make sure that they are built into the contracts that you hammer out with your service provider. If you are seeking contracts with extensions and you want them to be available to you, make sure that you put that in your narrative, and if you have it, also into a into a RFP. So you'll have it in both places. We're seeking a 5-year contract. Make sure also that you identify how long you want the contract to be in terms of its maximum length. So if we want we'd like an initial 5-year contract with 3 annual extensions. That's great. Just make sure that you spell it out. There's nothing wrong with that. But remember that every contract that is signed under the E-Rate umbrella must have a defined contract end date even when all extensions are exercised. Okay, so make sure that you can look at that contract and say, yep, as of such and such a date, we will have run through the initial period of the contract, and the contract will expire at the end of X number of extensions that you've identified, because they do not allow for an evergreen contract. In other words, make sure that your contract doesn't say, well, at the end of each year, we'll just decide whether or not we want to keep going. That does not allow for, or does not clearly spell out that as of a certain date, the contract will be done and completed in full for perpetuity. Any last questions?
I've got something, Scott.
Yes.
I know that you are the guru and the man who knows all.
You're kind.
I was looking at the E-Rate site last week to see if the new eligibilities list had been released yet, and it hadn't as of last week.
Right.
And I know sometimes you have inside info if there has been any changes or not, as far as anything that's eligible. I know that the big conversation about Wi-Fi coverage
on buses, yep.
Yeah, that has changed, and some of this could be applicable to a 470. So I'm wondering if you have any input along those lines, if you know anything that maybe, because obviously, and I know we say this all the time every year, but we have new folks that are listening in. When you file a 470, when you don't have to. Obviously, you don't have to for CATS contracted items because the state files the 470 for that. But if you're doing UPSs or wiring a building or WAN fiber and so forth, so could you briefly let us know if you know anything good?
Yeah, I mean, right now it does appear that to some extent Wi-Fi on buses will be supported. As far as the details on that are concerned, they're quite honestly, from my own personal perspective, I'd like to see them honestly delay it for another year to work out the minutia of what will and what won't be eligible. That having been said, there's probably, by the time decisions are made, not going to be a whole lot of time to go out to bid for those types of services. So it might not hurt to put something on the street if that's something that folks are interested in. It does appear right now as though that those services will be Category 1. I'm not sure how that's going to play out. Everything is still in discussion stage, and except for there's been some initial comments and requests for input from the FCC on the rules that should exist around it. But there was a resolution, a joint resolution, or that's not probably the right technical term, but there was an action that was taken by the FCC to adopt the eligibility of Wi-Fi on buses going forward. So if it's something that folks were interested in, I think if you follow the general rules about 470s and requesting services, that at least it's something that you could price out at this point and have something in hand so that if and or when the details are hammered down, if that occurs prior to the end of the funding window, that folks could go ahead and apply for that. That having been said, beyond that, I would not want to speculate too much, just because the tendency is for speculation to be interpreted as that's the way it's going to be. And we both know, and I think those who've been in the E-Rate world long enough know that, just because that's the way it sounded like it was going to be doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the way it is. Oftentimes we have things like Epic dictating policy rather than policy dictating how systems like Epic work. So it's just probably, it's one of those things where be prepared for it. It's coming. Couldn't hurt to put an RFP out on the street for it. Couldn't hurt to put a 470 out for it, although I'm not sure how you do that right now because it's really not an option yet in the drop downs or anything where you identify what it is that you want. But as long as your RFP was open for long enough, I suppose you could have you could go and file a late filed, or not late filed, but a last minute 470, and as long as your RFP is still open, and you accept all bids up until the moment you start unsealing them and reviewing them, you could be in a position to take advantage of that, come next year. So if that's something that you're already doing and you don't have a contract for it, or you're needing to renew the contract for it going forward, then yeah, absolutely, I would definitely do that. If it's something that your district has been considering, I think probably I would recommend considering it for an additional year and let the early adopters be the ones who suffer the pain and the broken glass this first year, and see how that plays out. Let the details be sorted out before going through that process a year from now, to really take advantage of those options, Wi-Fi on buses in particular.
So along those lines, because you've kind of hit on what I've told some folks is, it's kind of a wait and see, because we don't know a lot yet. And obviously the 471 filing windows opening and closing has not been announced yet.
Correct.
So, but we can kind of go under the assumption it's going to be along the same time frames as last year.
Yep. So
you still have at least 3 months probably of opportunity to still file a 470. So you've got some time to wait, unless it's critical. Now, obviously, you don't.
Oh yeah, yeah. For those new services, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for the new services. Now, on a fiber bid,
don't wait.
Don't wait.
Don't wait.
Do it as soon as possible.
I'm not going to say you're late now, but it's getting it's definitely, we're into the fourth quarter, to use a sports analogy. Anything else from anyone? I do appreciate everybody stopping by and having a listen. I will encourage you to, if you have any questions, you can start with bugging the good people like Bruce and Damon and the crew in our KE team. They are fantastic. They are incredibly knowledgeable. They are, they defer to me on lots of things, but at the same time, I know that they are incredibly knowledgeable and probably could do my job probably better than I do in many cases. So don't hesitate to ask them for some help. But at the same time, please don't feel like you're going to be interrupting anything that Caprice or myself are doing, because a large part of what we do is to be here to help you. So, don't hesitate to give us a call. We'll be happy to set up conversations online and walk you through specific questions that you have. Without any further ado, then I will thank everyone for attending, and I'll hang out for just a few minutes after we're done to answer any additional questions. Thank you, everybody.